How are we all entangled in life? And are we all really just Sora, Kairi, or Xehanort? Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about some convoluted nonsense. We're going to talk about how we're all entangled, people and hearts, and etc. And we're also going to talk about the entangledness that we see in Kingdom Hearts, how everybody's somehow just one of these three characters, maybe? If you're excited for that, as I am, you might be a geek. So as Joe likes to say, welcome back, you geeks. Speaking of Joe, I am here with the return guest, former host, the one and only Joe Dea, as well as Christian Ashley, the two people who were willing to suffer through me talking about Kingdom Hearts. Welcome back.
God help us all.
Yep.
And it's even worse now that I recently started a Substack that's Kingdom Hearts themed, and now I've been digging more into the lore, and somehow I've managed to become more of a Kingdom Hearts geek. I didn't know it was possible, but it's happened.
And we get it, you Substack.
Listen, I got a plug, especially while it's new, you know. Hey,
Once per
guys,
episode, it has to happen.
yeah.
Yeah.
But we like to shout out what we've been geeking out on. I'm trying to not just say I won't just say Kingdom Hearts. I'm going to hint at a future episode. We have something planned next year for our annual theme that starts with us talking about Pokemon Arceus. And I was like, I needed a refresher on some lore stuff that happened early on, so I started playing just to get that. I just haven't stopped playing. It's so good. So that's what I'm geeking out on. Christian, what about you, man?
Yeah. Just been re-going through the Alien franchise, and I got to Prometheus again. Said, okay, I didn't really like it the first time around. Have things changed? No, not really. If anything, it became worse in my eyes. So there's that.
Man, speaking of which, at some point in time, somewhere will be uploaded. There was a talk at Theology Beer Camp this year that Ryan Doze did with none other than Leah Robinson, big scholar name for those who care about it, about the Alien franchise. So be checking that out. That's going to be a lot of fun. I know you guys also did a drive-in, and there's a show coming out, so a lot of Alien content out there. Joe,
Yeah.
what about you, man? What you been geeking out on?
I have been returning to my sci-fi roots as a fan and going through the Planet of the Apes franchise. Just
Yeah.
wrapped it up
Fantastic.
and trying to make sense of the convoluted timeline of those movies.
Yeah, that's almost. Well, actually, it's not. I was gonna say it's almost a convoluted Kingdom Hearts. It's not. Nothing's this convoluted. I don't
Nope.
think.
Nothing's
I
as
think this
convoluted.
sets the bar. Oh man! So guys, if you're on a laptop, please consider rating and reviewing our show on Podchaser or on Good Pods. That's going to help our show gain some recognition, make it easier for search engines to find or something. I don't know. If you're on your phone, consider rating, reviewing, or commenting on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That also helps prioritize shows and algorithms and nerd stuff that y'all don't care about. If you do it, it helps us. We always like to shout out one of our supporters. You can support the show on Apple Podcasts, Captivate, or Patreon. Today, we're going to be giving a special shout out to none other than Jonathan Augustin. You rock. I actually got to meet him in person, and it was awesome. He's a cool guy, and we appreciate him. And if you would like your own shout out, like Jonathan, you also can support our show for as little as $3 a month on one of those platforms I mentioned above, Captivate, Patreon, and Apple Podcast. Finally, with all of the legwork out of the way, it's time to get to the real stuff. Convoluted nonsense. Here we go. Let's start off with the easy question. What is everyone's history with these games, with entanglement, theology, process theology, etc.? I'll start off. Make sure you guys can form opinions because I feel like that was a weirdly worded question. I have played every single one of these games since the first one released, every single year, with the exception of the mobile games. I just watch the videos every year, every time I play through. And last year, or the year before, weirdly enough, reading a book about what's worthy of your finitude and just kind of not limiting yourself to what you think you're supposed to enjoy and just kind of leaning into who you are somehow has led to me playing the game way more than once every year. I probably played through them all 4 times this year. It's been crazy. But I love the franchise. I'm deeply connected. I have a whole Substack about it I mentioned earlier, so I don't think I could possibly go into my history with these. At one point, I'm told that I told somebody how to beat an entire level while I was asleep. So that's a thing. Not sure if I believe it, but it doesn't seem impossible. So if you want to know my history of the games, that's probably about right. When it comes to entanglement theology, Will Rose is my pastor. I don't think I need to say too much more than that. There's a drinking game. Every time he says entangled, you take a shot. Um, but it's actually been not till this year that I started studying a lot of metaphysics that I was like, oh, wait a minute. There's a lot more to entanglement theology than just who am I related to. There's also the whole, my brain doesn't exist without some entanglement of different cells that constantly are replacing each other. So entanglement theology is weird. Process theology, I have a lot that I admire. I have a lot of friends who are part of this camp or part of the open and relational theology kind of stuff. Tom Ord, Josh Patterson. These are guys who close and dear to my heart. I'm friends with them. They listen to the show sometimes, so I have to be nice. No, I'm nice anyway. These guys can tell you. I always say nice things about them. I can't get on board with process theology mostly just because I don't believe in time. So this whole idea of like God changing, how can he change? Time's not real. Anyway, that's where I'm at. Christian,
Yes.
what's your background with all this?
Yeah, Kingdom Hearts, like I said multiple times before, I never got into it as a kid. I saw a roommate playing it in college and decided that I'd check it out, and I fell in love with the games. And this goofy, convoluted, as we mentioned multiple times over, a set of games where multiple people are different people, but they're also the same people, and you get to go to different Disney worlds, and sometimes you engage with the plots well, sometimes not so much. It's a ton of fun. Uh, Entanglement theology, I'll be honest, this is one that I haven't really studied that much. And I'm just a simple little country boy from North Kakalaki, so all these highfalutin terms sometimes
Who's
mess with my brain.
graduating seminary next semester, for the record.
So like I don't completely understand everything, but I get the general idea of like a we are all connected in some way, shape, or form. Through the Trinity, through being humans ourselves, and so I can get behind a lot of it. I just don't pretend to get everything that's involved with it. Now, in direct contrast to that, process theology is bunk. I despise a lot of it. You're getting a very no filter Christian today. I'm not in the best of moods, so I'm just going to say that no holds barred. I don't like how it views God. I don't like how it views time, which exists and is a thing.
Well,
Uh,
that's pretty much
uh,
scientifically disproven, for the record.
sure. And I just don't like the idea of God changing because that has absolutely nothing to do with the God that I see in Scripture. So there's more to it than that. But for the sake of just, I'm not in it to win it for a process.
Yeah, I will say as a quick caveat, even because none of us are process theologians, just to be nice to people who are, they're not like just godless heathens,
Oh no
you
no
know,
no no!
they will take out of scripture, like the Bible does say God changed his mind or God did this. Ironically, it's usually people who don't take the Bible literally, but take that part very literally, which confuses me slightly. Joe.
So with Kingdom Hearts, I remember. So I'm of that generation where the Final Fantasy 7, Final Fantasy 8, those were huge back in the day, and so I remember somebody pitched me on Final Fantasy meets Disney, and at that point
Yeah.
I was like meh on the whole Disney portion of it, but so I gave it a try, and I've only played through Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2. I've watched the lore dumps for the rest of the story, essentially, which is part of what I love about this series. Is it makes for phenomenal lore dump videos on YouTube. Long, very long, but phenomenal.
Yes.
As far as the theological components, I've always been into quantum physics, like even from my
Fascinating.
youth, I was into quantum physics. And so that aspect of the theological components really I find very interesting. So entanglement theology was something that I always made sense to me. Like the entanglement part of it made sense to me prior to becoming a Christian, and then putting it within the context of Christianity made perfect sense to me, and does make perfect sense to me. That being said, I as far as the process side, I as a person who values coloring outside of the lines, and fundamentally stating that I really believe that the spirit um works best outside of the confines of organized religion. I can appreciate any time that any of our brothers and sisters explore, ask questions, think deeply, and really dare to push on the boundaries of what has been indoctrinated, what has been institutionalized, all of that, because I think all too often Christians reach for a nice, pretty theological response that they've learned from a church or they've learned from a standardized denomination or something along those lines because it's easy. Exploring outside of that, I think, a is a worthwhile endeavor, like these two other gentlemen have said. I am also not a process theologian. There are some of the points where, as somebody who would identify as a Christian mystic, these things, a lot of it makes sense. There are certain parameters where it goes as far as process theology where I'm like, I that feels like more philosophy and less um concrete theology in my opinion. But again, that's my opinion. But
Mhm.
I think for me with these games, some of my appreciation for these games has grown even more the deeper I get into looking at the metaphysics of it all or the theological implications of some of these topics that do get addressed in these games.
Yeah, yeah, and I think some of the convoluted nature of the games are on purpose. We're gonna get to that
Yeah.
later on, but also just again a little bit more theology background because I mentioned I don't like process really. I admire them. The thing I admire most about process and radical theology, which we're not talking about radical theology today, but I lump them together mostly probably because of Josh Patterson. Just being honest, check out his show, Rethinking Faith. Love him.
Yeah.
Free plug.
Solid
But,
show.
yeah. What I like about those, even if I disagree with them, is that like people who hold to those really genuinely believe their actions matter. So a lot of the times they're doing the work of the kingdom, maybe better than some of the people who have theologies closer to mine. So that's where I'm like, they might be wrong, but I like what they're doing.
Yeah.
And then I also had to throw out there that I dislike Calvinism more than I dislike either of those because again,
It's very
Calvinism
true. Yes.
also relies on
Agreed.
time existing, which it does not. Sorry, Christian. I like science.
Well, I do too. Rational science.
Space time might exist. Time doesn't exist. But that's a different conversation. Actually, it's not really because it's also about entanglement. Time doesn't exist without substance. But all that out of the way, this isn't just a philosophy or theology podcast. This is primarily a geek podcast. So I have to throw it to you guys. In Kingdom Hearts fandoms, there's a lot of like chatter about different things that nobody else in the entire world cares about. You know, like I'm thinking about the amount of times I've had arguments with people about like very specifically whether the Kingdom Key is still the Kingdom Key throughout the entire first game. And it absolutely has to be, or none of what happens at the end with Kingdom Key D makes any sense at all. Also, I feel like I should have thrown out at the beginning of this. This episode is not for like your average listener. They're like, if you're not a Kingdom Hearts fan, some of this isn't going to make any sense. And I'm sorry, but we can't explain all that and this not be a 10-hour episode.
Josh has already taken everybody out into the deep end, so understand it's only gonna get worse from here.
Oh yeah, way worse.
He's drowning you right now, saying it's for your own good.
All right. So one of the things that gets thrown around as a criticism by fans who criticize the creator of the games, because you know that's what good fans do, just like Star Wars fans criticize George Lucas. One of the big criticisms, and what they seem to fail to notice, is that like, okay, sidebar, the creators of Kingdom Hearts are aware of the criticism, and instead of being like Star Wars and trying to correct it, they lean into it and make fun of you for criticizing them.
100%.
For example, everyone was like, oh no, we're tired of Kingdom Hearts 1.5, 2.5, 2.8. So naturally, they called the beginning of Kingdom Hearts 3 2.9 because you know what? Screw you, fans.
Yeah,
But it was
no,
hilarious.
best
It was
joke
so
in the
funny.
series. I died
died.
laughing.
It was so funny. When you pick it up and everyone's been complaining for like literally 10 years since the last game came out. I was like, I'm tired of 2.5 and 2.8. I want 3. And then like you do the prelude and they're like Kingdom Hearts 2.9. And I was like, that was fantastic. Good moment. They also do something very similar with Xehanort that I'm going to talk about. But criticism has been thrown around for a long time amongst the fans that everyone seems to like we meet a new character and then it turns out that they're either Sora, Kairi, or Xehanort. Everyone is either one of these 3 people. Is that criticism legitimate? Christian.
No, but it's funny to say it is. Because there's such a long drought in between games, if naturally fans are going to go hollow. That's what they call it in like the Dark Souls fandom. The idea of like we've had no new content, we have nothing new, so we'll just make up new lore. It's what happens with the Batman Arkham Asylum games. You see the Reddit post of just Batman being man and the Joker being the Jonkler, the Asylum being Asylum. That's what they're talking about because they've had no real content, so now they're just making up these different posts just to make fun of things and make fun of the fandom itself. Because it's ridiculous how many times someone else is either a Sora, Kairi, or Xehanort. But then when you say everyone is, no, that's not everything. Donald's still Donald. Goofy's still Goofy. Elsa's still Elsa.
King Mickey.
Mickey's still Mickey. But there's a lot. There are a lot of characters who are one of these people in some way, shape, or form because of how the metaphysics of the series works. So there's enough to where you can make that statement and it kind of be true, but it's not wholly true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I feel like that's a pretty solid answer. Joe, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think from a character standpoint, from an in-game standpoint, that what Christian just said makes all of the sense in the world, but also at the same token, the way that this story is presented, these characters kind of embody core aspects of the person, like of the human. And so having a lot of the character traits and story beats kind of flowing out from these specific characters makes a lot of sense to help bolster, like Christian was saying, the metaphysics of it and the fact that in order to tell the story that they are telling, they have to there has to be a substantive portion of characters that are in some way, shape, or form connected, and all of that. But from an actual story beat perspective, I think it helps the storytelling process because they hold core aspects of human characteristics, that it helps fans become more invested into the story as a whole by getting more invested in the stories, by getting more invested in the characters.
Yeah. I for my part, much like a lot of the times you come to the Bible with preconceived notions and then you interpret it based on what you expect to see there. I feel like some of the same thing happens. Like it kind of depends on what you think of metaphysics yourself. If you think that everyone is individual humans going into the game, you're going to see some moments where you're like, yeah, no, they're not all the same. If you're more like me, where you think everybody is a part of one another anyway, because I'm a weirdo Christian Taoist, but you're going to look at it and be like, maybe they are all these 3 people. Maybe those 3 people are also the same person, right? Because like even in the first Kingdom Hearts game, you have near the end where Sora loses the Keyblade, and he has that cheesy moment where he's like, I don't need a weapon. My friends are my power. And you start hearing like all the voices and stuff, and it's like, wait a minute. How are all of these characters empowering him at that moment without being there? That can't be the case unless somehow they are also Sora or connected to Sora. So in a way, yeah, Donald, Goofy, and all of them are also Sora. So like maybe the criticism is true, but you can also say that about Star Wars with Rey in that one moment in the terrible movies we don't talk.
We don't
about.
talk about that.
Yeah,
We don't talk
we
about
don't.
that.
We
But
can't talk about things that were never made.
yeah, that's true. But but with this game specifically, and we're gonna get to this later too. What is so fascinating about this question is somehow you are your own person made up of all these individual parts because your body can be separated from your soul and your spirit and your heart, and you can read lore about the summons and the gems and the heartless and the nobodies. And it's like my person can be split up in all these different parts that are clearly not connected, but yet somehow also I am intimately connected with every other individual. So it's playing that both cards, and I think that's part of the point, is to kind of show us how you are a part of everything, even if you think you're made up of all these parts. You're actually connected to everything else, which is a big theological statement in of itself. Even though this isn't a theological game, it's more of a philosophical statement. But if you're a Christian, some philosophy necessarily becomes theology. Yeah. Any comments before we move on from that?
Not ones that actually pertain to the game. It will absolutely dovetail us into a different direction. So I'm going to say nope.
Okay. We'll hold on
Fair.
to it for later. We have 3 main parts of the game I want to go through, a little bit of others, and then we're gonna dig into some of that weird philosophy theology stuff that we just hinted at here. First, we're gonna start with Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories. Joe, could you kind of explain just specifically the character who is Namine? Who is she, and what is her part of the story, and how is she actually just Kairi?
So Naminé is the nobody of Kairi. She's born when Sora becomes a heartless in order to free Kairi's heart. But the process is not exactly the same as it is for others, and so it turns out that Naminé has this ability to influence Sora's thoughts, which is
Yeah, that's a good
probably
one.
the most watered down version of her story that I could give to you guys that are already like, I have no idea what's going on.
I personally I feel like Nominee might be the most confusing one. Even though like Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories, I feel like is one of the easier games to get through compared to some of the other side games. Yeah, her character makes no sense sometimes. You're like, what? But
Well,
Yeah,
Kyrie's
the
body
biggest thing
was
about
still there and empty, and her heart was still present. So there was no point when her body or heart became hearts or nobodies, and yet somehow she was a nobody, and I still can't get my head around that.
I
Yeah,
think the thing about Nominee's character is it takes the most creative liberty with the individual aspects of the metaphysical concepts that are at play in these games,
Mhm.
and saying that even though you didn't have the clear-cut formula that would be otherwise exemplified when a character like this is created or what have you, we need to have a character that can do
Mhm.
special things, and thus because she can do special things, we need a special origin story for her.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's one of those. The story necessitated the character in this instance. That might have been a little bit lazy, honestly, but
yeah. It kind of breaks how nobodies are supposed to be made from what happens here. And I'm sorry if I didn't read, Xehanort's secret report 358 over 2 times birth by sleep. Like it, 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 it the way
I
nobodies are
love that
supposed to be
reference.
created are supposed to be like, your heart is affected by darkness, and princesses of light aren't supposed to have darkness at all. And
Yes.
it the reason why they kind of give is that because she was in Sora's heart, and when he tries to unmake himself in order to bring her back to life, I have to say that sentence. Um, it is kind of what creates the nobody,
Yeah.
Yeah,
which is
it's
its
weird.
own ordeal. But like, you just accept that it happens, move on with your life. Nomura didn't have everything written down as what I would like other
Yeah,
people to
he's not
do,
Oda.
so just accept it. Yeah,
This is
he's
not
not
One
Oda.
Piece. He's not Oda. Yeah, but
No,
yeah, no, I still love how it all is formed, even if it is a little wackadoodle. That's my word today, wackadoodle. Um, but yeah, I think the problem is they wanted more Kairis, but Kairi being a princess of heart, like you mentioned, means certain things can't happen the way that it does for everybody else. Um, so quick sidebar: how's everybody feel about them trying to create a new 7 princesses of heart? Did that irk you, or were you just like, yeah, whatever?
I accepted it. It was more like, okay, we're gonna have new movies introduced in the show in the game, and we're not gonna go retread old worlds too many times, and I'm fine with that. So I'm sure like Princess of Heart could be like some regenerating thing that just keeps happening over time.
Yeah. I think I would have liked it if they would have done more with it, but it was just kind of like, we're going to create a new Seven Princesses of Heart. They mentioned it.
Oh yeah.
You meet some of these princesses. Nothing ever happens with that. So it's like, why?
Well,
Why even bring it up?
we also don't have in 3 like we do in 1 where multiple of them are together, in like a
Yeah.
hollow bastion kind of scenario. So
Yeah.
that does weaken it a little bit, and especially with how they treat like the stories of the movies in 3. That's one of my criticisms against the game is I love the game, but
Yeah.
they just didn't like explore the Disney properties that well. So yeah.
Except for Toy Story. Well, actually,
Oh, Toy
both
Story was
Pixar, Toy Story,
fantastic.
Monsters Inc. I feel like they did really; those were all
Yes.
great. But quick caveat, and the sidebar will be over unless Joe wants to add something. I do want to throw out there though, it could depend what happens with the black box that Maleficent and Pete are after. So we might see more of those same princesses in 4. They might bring back princesses, which would be interesting. They haven't really done that before. I don't know. Anybody have anything to add before the sidebar's over? Does anyone want to explain who Xion is?
Xion.
There we are.
Yeah. Xion essentially is Sora's memories of Kairi being given a body. So that's why she looks similar to both him and her, and kind of like this almost cute little hybrid baby that is trying to learn who she is. There's
That's a
more to it
sentence.
than that.
Yeah, this is a great sentence to hear.
There's a lot of brand new sentences you have to say because of this stupid game series that I would never have
Yeah,
said before in
true.
my life. And I love the
That's
fact that I
accurate.
have to
Yeah.
say them.
Yeah.
I sound like a
I
madman.
agree. I agree. But I do think part of Xion, maybe I said that right. Her existence, I think, is really just because the creators of Kingdom Hearts very clearly are like deeply invested in metaphysics and philosophy,
Mhm.
and a lot of our philosophy of what it means to exist revolve around the idea of memory, which is also why Chain of Memories happens, because it's there's the philosophical quandary of if you, I'm going to pick on Christian today, suddenly woke up, your soul, whatever, was taken, placed into the King of France, King of England, whatever, and you had none of your memories. Your soul was there, no memories. You have all of his memories, and you're in a new body. Is that still you? And a lot of people
Time
would say
traveling
no.
too.
Right.
We'll do King of England. He could be current.
Yeah, it's interesting too because I don't know if either of you have watched Babylon 5, but there's this order of monks that show up in the show, and one of them is actually revealed to be a serial killer in the past who had his mind wiped and has now become like a monk and like fully has bought into everything. And like the idea of like, well, which one is actually him? Is it the serial killer from before? Is it the person who's like devoted himself to Jesus? And it's being written by an atheist, an avowed atheist at that, which is why atheists often write Christian veteran Christians, but that's its own separate issue. And it's very interesting. Is that who I am still? Now that I no longer have memories of who I was. And that's something this series brings up to multiple times over. So I would argue, yes, you're still you, but something's got to happen to like re-trigger those memories to come back because you're also taking on aspects of something else that have molded you into a new kind of hybridized soul in that
Yeah.
scenario.
Yeah. The other
Yeah.
philosophical like big thing involves like cloning, and it's interesting how people answer this like intuitively. If you were cloned, your clone has all the same memories, everything as you. You both can keep living on. Everyone would say you're still you. The clone is someone different for the most part. Very few people say you're both literally the same person. But if you die at one moment and your memories and everything gets transported into a clone of you at that exact same moment, a lot of people would say, no, that's you now. But it's kind of like what that nothing physically different happened other than they just don't exist at the same time if you believe in time.
Yeah, it's so part of what you're getting at is some of the core conversations that tend to be had around transhumanism. And that whole idea of the ascension of man, whatever that looks like. Most times there's that centers around the idea of either some sort of technological integration or The idea where you can basically farm out body parts and a new carbon based life form, and that gets into the question of what actually is the soul, what actually makes an individual, because if you're
Mhm.
transferring memories with the idea that now you can extend life but in a different vessel, then does that mean that there is actually a soul, or is the sum total of your experience your consciousness, like the sum total of who you are, your consciousness? um I think that I think as far as the game goes, they really wanted to go as wide as they could with exploring different concepts and aspects of these different philosophical arguments. I think that's part of exactly where you get some of the deepest divides in fans, in what parts of
Yes.
this that they like, because I've met plenty of people who really dig the Final Fantasy aspect of it, where it's more centered around the gameplay and it's more centered around like that component, the visual aspect of it. Whereas the folks that tend to value the storyline of it all tend to appreciate how many different aspects of philosophy and all of that these creators try to hit. I personally am of the opinion that I kind of wish as a whole they would have figured it out, maybe like pared it down a bit and really tried to dig into specifics, like specific concepts, because I think they're fascinating and I love the fact that they want to tackle them. But when you try to go so varied into all of these different topics and things like that, you're going to hit a brick wall very quickly. And it even goes back to some of what we were talking about at the very beginning, talking about process theology. To me, something like entanglement theology makes all of the sense in the world because it's not actually theoretical. You can really dive into it regardless of which avenue you're approaching it from. Some of these different philosophical arguments come down to just positing different human based theories that cannot actually be proven or disproven because they are rife with excuse me, they are rife with interpretation, they are rife with different different opinions, and thus are subject to a person's own experiences. You know what I mean? Like for me, this whole idea of the integration of man and technology is 1000% influenced by where I started in my journey as a former transhumanist. Death phobia. Many of us who are part of that community 1000% enter into that by way of death phobia. So
Mhm.
that's where I think some of these arguments, they do end up convoluted because some of them can turn into a dog chasing its tail, so to speak. And again, please, for anybody who has made it this far into the episode and I just pissed off with with what I just said, who would count themselves as a process theologian or somebody who is a philosopher and all of that sort of stuff, see previous statement. I love when people are willing to ask big questions. I love when people are unafraid to explore the unknown. I think we need more of that in this world. So I don't think that that's a bad thing. I'm also not going to hold back, though, on where I see the flaws in these different thought processes.
Yeah. I I wouldn't change anything about the games. I kind of like that it's convoluted because I think it shows that entanglement bit. If you just do one at a time, you're tackling them individually. You make a lot of substance based arguments, and that's where I agree with Alfred Whitehead when it's like substance based metaphysics don't actually make any sense. Because I would say that if I
Right.
look at myself without any of my memories, I'm not the same person. I'm a different version of me, but I'm not me. But if I have all my memories and I lose my soul, I also would not say I'm me. If I lose parts of my body, we see where like brain damage affects people's personalities and stuff. So it's like that's also part of what it means to be me. So I don't think I am any of these parts, and I think because I'm not any of these parts, I wouldn't say that adding them together, all of a sudden I'm a sum of the parts, but rather I am the relationship of those parts. I am the entanglement of those things.
Yeah.
So I define myself by that
Yeah.
relationship of my mind, memory, soul, all of those things. And that's what this game does is it shows us that like not one single thing makes you. And putting them together
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily equal it, which is also why I hate the Greta Van Fleet song, the anthem where they're like, the world is what the world is made of. And I'm like, no, it is not. That is not, we are not the parts. There is something bigger when things relate with one
Yeah.
another.
Yeah, I would definitely agree, and Christian, I'll stand down here for a second. But you said something, Josh, that I wanted to key in on, because it hits close to home. So I'm a former mixed martial artist and boxer and combat sport participant, and like many who were long in the tooth in that world, and successful in that world, it comes with it comes at a cost. And like many of my brothers and sisters in combat sports, I had a traumatic brain injury. Um, it does affect you.
Yeah.
There is a very big reality to the fact that it does bear an impact. On top of that, I have unfortunately walked through a couple of different versions and scenarios of watching people that I love very deeply um, deteriorate mentally. And
Yeah. That's the
there
hard part.
is a very big reality that you have to confront when walking through those things that says, this person becomes somebody new. And from a mental health
Mhm.
standpoint,
Yeah.
when you are processing what it looks like to engage with that person and interact with that person in order to protect your peace, in order to be able to navigate those things well, yes, you still love that person, but you cannot hold them to the standard that you once did, because they are becoming somebody different, because they
Mhm.
don't think the same way. They may have had all of those experiences, but the ability to be able to engage with those memories is gone or is going. And so they in effect become a new version of themselves. So I don't necessarily dismiss how convoluted the games are. I still think you can have
Mhm.
the rich complexity without trying to go a little bit of water into so many buckets. You can
Mhm.
still have a lot of complexity, but leaving room to be able to maybe pour a little bit more water in not quite as many buckets.
Yeah. Yeah. I see what you're saying. I just feel like making it more confusing helps. I'm just weird. But I'm going to throw a couple wrenches in here, and then we're going to immediately move on because we've barely touched the surface of what we want to talk about. Because there's two parts of the entanglement stuff. One is how we're entangled within ourselves, and then what does it mean to be entangled with others? Um, but the couple wrenches. One is you will also see where certain kind of things will happen to people's brains that cause them to suddenly like the kind of shit we're talking about is like stuff where like they went to church, they loved everybody, they were nice and joyful, and then all of a sudden now they're an angry person who cusses all of the time, who is an addict because of something that happened to their brain. And it's really hard for people who believe in souls to look at that and go, they were a Christian and now they do all this stuff. Did they lose their salvation because of a mental illness? And it's like that seems like a terrible thing to say. Reconciling that is really, really difficult. And that's where I think entanglement theology helps, but it doesn't offer all the answers that maybe we would like. Um, the other wrench, the time stuff, because I also, I've had some brain injury from my accident, and I wouldn't say the person I was then is the same person I am now. For someone who doesn't believe in time, that's hard to reconcile, uh, because it's like, well, from my experience, who I was at one point is different than who I am now. So that seems like an experience of time. But we know from like Einstein's experiments where he was trying to disprove space that space time are kind of connected, so time can't exist on its own. And then in comes Immanuel Kant with the kind of proving philosophically that time only exists a priori, and you're like, well, all that makes sense, but I'm still experiencing something like time. So yeah, those are the wrenches. Everything is confusing in real life and in the games. Congratulations, everybody. You've made it this far. And now we're going to move on to what I believe was Christian's favorite game in the series, Birth by Sleep.
Yes.
Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep. Could you explain the story of Ventus, Vanitas, and like all the people who are Sora?
Right. So to fully explain Ventus, you need to play this phone game that came afterward, where he comes from the
Oh,
future.
man.
Excuse me, from the past into the future. But no, that's not actually brought up in the game because that was made later on. Because
Yeah.
that's how Nomura do.
Yeah, of course.
So in the game of Birth by Sleep, Ventus is one of 3 trainees under Master Ericus who are trying to become Keyblade masters. And he was brought to him by Master Xehanort, that good old guy. You know, he's got that, you definitely don't think he's a villain by his looks based alone. And come to find out, Xehanort had done experimentation because as he's trying to figure out what the heart is and what darkness is, where he split Ventus into 2 separate bodies. One of them his darkness, which is Vanitas, the other which is Ventus, which is basically his whole light without darkness, even though he can do dark things later on, but don't worry about
Don't worry
it.
about it.
Yeah. And what happens along the way is that when that initially happened, across time and space and reality, Sora's heart as a child responded to the anguish that Ventus was feeling, and their hearts connected across that huge gap of how the heck long that would end up being. And that helped preserve Ventus a little bit, and it established that connection between them so that later on, Ventus also kind of resides in Sora's heart to an extent. When they end up meeting in the Destiny Islands, Sora is a kid, and there's a connection there once more. And then Ventus gets taken off of the page by like being put to sleep, and then Aqua kind of keeps him over there away from everyone else, but also his heart is also kind of residing in Sora, which is why when Sora's nobody is created, Roxas, that's why he
Also
looks like
Sora.
Ventus, who, yes, because it's made the connection that they felt before has transferred here as well, and also Roxas being Sora's darkness to an extent there too, exploring the 2 difference there. That's why he can wield a Keyblade because Sora is a Keyblade master, and also because Ventus was a Keyblade user. He never became a master. So it's that sticky thing of like, okay, all 3 of these people exist separately now. We just got to get bodies for him later on, and thank God, because I'm happy to see a happy ending to a lot of this madness. So there's that.
Yeah, it's also why it might be why Sora can wield 2 Keyblades at some points, maybe, sort of, kind of. We don't know, but it looks cool,
Oh,
and isn't that fun?
also in another phone game, there's a Data Sora who
Oh
ends up
yeah.
gaining a heart.
Oh god, yeah, I forgot about that. There's lots of people who end up to be Sora. And Kairi's heart was one with Sora's for a large part of the first game too. Um, and what it sounds like is, from my understanding, um, and I like it in a weird way. Sora's heart is just pure. And what I love is, like, in the first game, you kind of are led to believe that Sora's like this chosen one, and then you see that there's other Keyblades, and you're like, wait a minute. And then the game progresses, and it's like, yeah, no, Sora just had like a really pure heart. He wasn't like a chosen one. He wasn't like prophesied. He wasn't like really anybody special at all. He just happens to have a good heart. And what that allows for is others are just kind of drawn to him. And I think Christians could learn a lot about that and maybe apply it to missiology, perhaps. Because I do think people are drawn
I feel like
to good.
I feel like with what Josh just said, I suddenly have an inside perspective on how Christian feels whenever he talks to my wackadoo self, and that SBC in you is like, hang on, wackadoodle, roll it back.
I like that
I
wackadoodle is the
feel
word of the day.
wackadoodle is the word of the day. I feel like with what Josh just said, I'm like, hey, hang on, Oshbed, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves here.
Ooh, wait, which part? Just you don't believe people are drawn to light, or you don't like what part of it?
I think that it goes into the philosophical conversation of morality and what we see as good or light or genuine. And
Yeah, that
I
makes
I
sense.
think that there's a bigger conversation to be had about genuineness rather than goodness.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, that's true too. I would say Sora's probably both, so we can probably get around that conversation a little bit because he is genuine and I think he is good. But I also do know that I'm the weird one out here because I'm like, yeah, everybody is generally created good, and leaning into who you are is a good thing because you are good. But that's not a normal Christian doctrine, unless you're Orthodox. Then it's close to normal. Not Orthodox is in Orthodox theology. Orthodox is in the Orthodox Church. Yeah, that wasn't confusing.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's one of those conversations that it depends on where you put the definition of good and how you view that word good, because I inherently believe everything that you said. I just would define the word good and what that's referring to as different. To say that people are good means that they are valued, not necessarily that they are wired for specifically good. Like that goes into the whole idea of being being an image bearer of God with inherent value, not necessarily speaking to how people are wired to act and engage and all of that. But likewise, I just want to throw this out there for everybody whose brain is tingling because of the people out here that being like that succumb to scumbag theology and all of that sort of jazz. I am not in any way, shape, or form advocating scumbag theology. And for those of you that don't know, that is a term that I coined that
For total
basically
depravity.
says that people are inherently like absolutely terrible and all of this sort of stuff, because that also has absolutely nothing to do with scripture.
Yeah. By the time this comes out, I'll probably have a whole church episode out about differing opinions about the original sin. But yeah, I'm one to believe that everyone is wired for good and is also valuable. Yeah. Whereas they're probably both of the everyone is valuable, but not necessarily wired for good. Um, but that's a different theological conversation. I'm going to move on to how everyone is Xehanort.
Free will is the answer. Anyway, go ahead.
Well,
Oh boy.
if you believe in time, I guess. I'm going to explain Kingdom Hearts Unchained,
Choice and time are
Key,
not the same thing.
and
Anyway,
yeah, choice.
they're not the
What
same thing.
how
I
you define choice kind of depends
My
on your
brain can't take
definition of
this today.
time. But anyway, Kingdom Hearts Unchained, Key, Unchained X. I don't know how to say that, and Unlinked. Some of the mobile games. A lot of this happens in mobile games that no one actually plays. I'm convinced there's not anyone out there who actually plays it, other than specifically in Japan, and only those who are near Tokyo Disneyland for some reason. Um, but we all watch the videos, and that's what matters. So there's a lot. So even before you get to the mobile games, you already met Ansem, the villain in the first game, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, that's the Heartless of Xehanort. And then you meet the Nobody of Xehanort, and then you meet Xehanort, who traveled through time. You already have some weird nonsense with it all. At one point, Riku's Xehanort. Cool. Birth by Sleep, it turns out Terra might be Xehanort. Who knows? But you get to the mobile games, everyone's already making fun of the creators because like, oh, everybody's either Sora, Kairi, and Xehanort. Well, here's what happens in the mobile games where they just decided to troll all fans and made it so much worse. So, the main guy here is the Master of Masters because this is like way back in the past. Master of Masters, there used to be a Keyblade War. He wants the next Keyblade War to happen. Don't worry about why, if, and time travel. Those are all things. Go to my Substack if you want more. There we go. Because I do explain a lot of that. He has 6, we'll call them disciples, so that they're the 7 people of light. There's supposed to be 13 people of darkness, etc., etc. He causes his followers to kind of build fractions. So what happens in the game is you're one of the people who are working for some of the 6 that he has. You have a Keyblade. You're going to do normal Kingdom Hearts things. but really you're fighting for these different factions. You kind of engage with one another, fight each other sometimes. Weird stuff happens. I don't understand a lot of it. Maybe there's a traitor amongst them. Everybody turns on each other. The important bit is he's pulling all the strings so that all the people think that somebody else is the traitor, and they're all kind of like turning on each other, and a bunch of internal drama and shenanigans are happening. And then near the end, you end up trapped. So your character has a choice to either end up becoming a cute little cuddly creature, because don't worry about it, or you can escape. But if you escape, your heart goes on, and you won't believe who everyone's heart becomes. Everybody is literally Xehanort. Literally everyone is Xehanort. That's how the mobile games end. Because everybody made fun of him for it. So he said, you know what? I'm just going to make it happen. Everyone is Xehanort. Which also, hilarious joke. The fact that they just included in the lore a joke to troll everybody was phenomenal. But also, yeah, that gets into like, when it comes down to it, prioritizing yourself so much, your own freedom, your own self, ends up causing you to become Xehanort, who we all just kind of am like, yeah, that is darkness itself, right? Like, so it kind of interesting commentary on whether or not we're wired for good or not, I guess. But that's also a whole discussion. So yeah, Xehanort is literally every single person who's ever played the mobile game is Xehanort, as well as all the other people from the Kingdom Hearts franchises who are bad guys are different versions of Xehanort. And so is Xehanort. And sometimes Riku.
Yeah.
So, to quote the great philosopher, the Joker, all
We
it
live in a
takes is one
society.
bad day. Like,
That's true.
all it takes.
Great one-shot Batman comics.
Yeah, yeah. And this is why I, because so this is one of those areas where I find that I tend to stand different than many Christians, because I wasn't made by the system, because I wasn't born and bred in the system. I had a radical come to Jesus moment, and that's how this whole thing started, as far as me being a Christian and then ultimately becoming a pastor. So it's one of those things that I've seen too much to say that the dial is set one way or the other. That's why I don't believe in scumbag theology, and that's why I cannot believe in predestination fully. Not like how it gets preached by
Yeah.
some. It's a yes and dynamic, not an either or dynamic. I think negating either one entirely ignores huge portions of scripture, huge portions of science. Like, there are so many things that would like a word if you say it's 1000% one way or the other. Just like when you're talking about, are people inherently wired for good, or are they inherently wired for evil? To say either one, huge portions of science, huge portions of theology, huge portions of spirituality, huge portions of scripture would like a word, because it just does not make a lick of sense. And I've lived too much of life to think that that's a thing, because otherwise you're putting way too many eggs in one basket or the other. And that's why I appreciate this. I love, so part of the lore dive and watching the videos and all of that kind of stuff is learning about the ribs that these guys pull, because apparently another one of the ribs that the creators pulled on the audience is everybody griping about the fact that all of this stuff was happening in mobile games, and so they kept doing mobile games just to screw with people.
Naturally.
And so I think that part of it's hilarious. So I love the fact that they were able to work a joke into the whole process. But from a storytelling standpoint, I can appreciate what they did, because when you are looking at like the sum total of perspective or desire. Like when you're looking at this whole idea of time, well, a lot of the whole time conversation comes down to point of view and perspective. That's a huge portion of what it is, how you reconcile a lot of these things. What is your point of view and what is your perspective? That also eliminates a lot of the issues that people have with putting God outside of space time. But when you look at that perspective, how easily can things shift? How easily can this desire that has maybe good intentions in your own mind become corrupted by some kind of selfish intent, or not really caring about the fact that it hurts somebody else or something along those lines? So almost in a way, while Xehanort's not meant to be a sympathetic character, you can build when they're building out this world that through the lens of philosophy and metaphysics and big questions and things like that, you suddenly are presented with an opportunity to maybe look at some of the humanity involved in all of this. That, yeah, okay, things were done inappropriately, incorrectly, whatever. You can still see that, man, this still started from very basic, very real human emotions or human perspectives.
Yeah. Two quick things, and we absolutely have to move on because we're running on time now, which stinks because we still got a big question. But the one, I would absolutely, if they want to take a word with me, Bible, science, and other things he said, we're wired for good. I'll take it. But the other part of that is the fun trolling at the end of Kingdom Hearts 3 when they were like, guess who the next big bad is? Master of Masters, who no one knows unless you played the mobile games. And I just was like, yeah, thank you. Thank you for just making that the absolute foundation for what happens next. I still not going to play the mobile games. Just for the record, I refuse at this point on principle. But we've done a lot of like entanglement and like theology, philosophy all throughout this weird convoluted conversation. I'm going to take it to Paul Tillich because I don't think you can get more convoluted than Kingdom Hearts and Paul Tillich. He describes when he's thinking about what it means to be ourself. What does it mean that I exist? In his book, The Courage to Be, I got some parts of a quote that I kind of just put together so that I didn't have to read like several paragraphs. And in the context of Kingdom Hearts, I would like to kind of contemplate this, get some words out. So here's some parts of quotes from the book. Self-affirmation is not the courage to be as oneself, but the courage to be as a part. The more self-relatedness a being has, the more it is able to participate. And he even goes on to define God by some of this, of like, since I am a part of everything, being self-aware really means being more a part of everything. And he would say the same thing for God, which is why Jesus is necessary, because if God is self-aware, he has to be a part of everything, which also goes to the immanence of God and what he will later call the ground of being that is God. But yeah, what do you guys think about this? Like being self-aware, does that mean I have to be aware of how I'm actually Sora, Kairi, or Xehanort? What does it mean to be self-aware in the context of knowing that we're all kind of connected in some way? Christian.
Yeah, this is one of those I had to do a thinker on. The metaphysics of this all, the philosophy of it all is not really my shtick. But I mean, just in the sake of things, like, yeah, I'm gonna be different around other people because of who they are. And but that's also part of me and being around them. But another thing you kind of brought up in one of the other questions here is the idea of, can we participate in the world? Is it impossible for us to be ourselves without relationships? Yeah, by my very nature, I am a cantankerous, hateful, spiteful person who despises other people. I'm the
I
most
still don't
misanthropic
believe it.
person on the planet. Yes, no. That is who I am as a person. And I could live my life that way. And as a result, that would be my relationship defining thing with other people. So my brain's all over the place with this. So maybe I answer your question, maybe I don't. And at this point, but the good news, yeah, let's get that part in, is that I have been changed into who I really should be. Those parts of myself that despise other people have been molded and changed into something else to where I can interact with those people. I can empathize with other people. I can then show compassion to those same people, because empathy enough is not good enough. I need to mold myself to the situations. I need to mold myself to the people while also still being me. And that's part of me being me, is molding myself that way. I don't know what the heck you would call that. This ain't my thing. So that's what I'm going to say.
I'm going to do a big entanglement theology dump before Joe goes. Yeah, there's a lot of ways to answer this, and I think the biggest way is just to say yes. And I think the more you understand about metaphysics and all of this, the more really what it comes down to is love your neighbor as yourself, because your neighbor is yourself. You know, I have, and this isn't just like physically people that like I see. It's not just like because Christian and I have spent time together physically in college. That's not the only reason. Part of me is due to Christian's existence. Like I wouldn't be me without the influence Christian had on who my personality. That also can go to C.S. Lewis. I wouldn't be me if C.S. Lewis did not write the books that he wrote. I wouldn't be me if Jesus Christ did not walk this earth. I wouldn't be me if Adolf Hitler did not exist. I am this being who I am is influenced by all of those personalities, but then there's also a physical layer of it. If the three of us sit down to eat a meal together, one of the most transcendent things to me is why I love Thanksgiving, why I love food parties. We are participating in consuming this food, right? Even if we take all the spiritual aspects out of it, physically what happens is part of that meal is going to physically be part of me. Like some of my cells are going to die and be regenerated because of the stuff that was in that food. Same thing with both of you. So by sharing that meal, we've shared something that physically becomes part of each of us, which is profoundly meaningful, even if you take the spiritual aspect out of it. If you add the spiritual aspect of how God is in everything, then it just kind of blows your mind and you're like, I don't even know what to do with that. So when I think of entanglement theology, yeah, like all of this is connected, which is where you go back to the game and I'm like, of course, everybody is Sora and Kairi and Xehanort because everybody's interconnected. Like physically, that's just a reality to certain degrees. So that's where I sit with it. Joe, final words.
Yeah, I think the self-awareness portion of it is incredibly important because you will not know yourself unless you are willing to ask questions. Why do I respond this way? What made me feel this way? Why did I react this way? And then be willing to actually um, get those answers and do something about it. It's not always easy and it's not always helpful, but it's always necessary to become a better version of yourself, a more fully formed human being from the theological side or the metaphysical side and all of that. Science has proven that even for the folks that are the most introverted, even for the folks that are the most relationally damaged, there's still evidence to dictate that people were created for relationship, for community, and operate the best within relationship and within community. Now, the problem is depending, and especially, this whole thing, this whole shindig at systematic ecology is God flavored, right? And so there are a lot of folks that have a Christian worldview that may be listening to this, and many of you may have a visceral reaction to this whole idea of we were made for community because somebody said it somewhere that all they were saying was get to church on Sunday because that's the right thing to do. Nah, miss me. That's not the point here. And it's so much deeper than that. It's so much more nuanced than that. And so for me, approaching this is exactly right up my alley from a standpoint of, you say something like mysticism, you say something like Christian mystics, and people think that's pseudo spiritual nonsense that people grab onto to try and make God whatever they want God to be. And really, in all actuality, it's taking very seriously the intimacy of the relationship that we have with God and the actual fact that we are something different at a spiritual and physical level. And so when you take into consideration that that can happen, how does that happen? By a blueprint of a people, of a species that all has the same origin point, and a species that at a spiritual level has interconnectedness. And so if that's the template that you're working off of, then it makes all of the sense in the world that that humanity would work best under the conditions of some form of relationship.
Yeah, yeah. Wrap it up. Just a quick few thoughts. To summed up thoughts, I guess, would be, if you believe in the Trinity, God created in relationship for relationship. If you believe in Jesus' words, we are to love our neighbor as ourselves because our neighbor is ourself. You can take the process stuff or not. You can take the entanglement stuff or not. But I think those statements are just true statements. So agree with us, disagree with us. Let us know in comments and on Discord and all that stuff. We would love to talk more about this stuff. Just not on air right now because we're running out of time. But we are getting ready to wrap up. I'm going to let you guys know we will do a bonus question really quickly. But if you would like a quick bonus question, we're going to ask if each of us were to discover that we're really Sora, Kairi, or Xehanort, who do we think we would be? I have thoughts. For now, though, quick recommendations from everybody. Man, this is difficult for me right now. It's I want to do a Christmas theme thing, but I can't think of any. Specifically, play Kingdom Hearts 2, the Nightmare Before Christmas level. There we go. Christian, what's your recommendation for everybody?
Well, no. Spinning it up so you can recommend Kingdom Hearts 2 again based on level. What a man. Yeah.
It's not even my favorite Kingdom Hearts.
Yeah. Uh, Earth Abides is a solid sci-fi post-apocalyptic book, and apparently, I learned earlier today, there's also going to be an HBO Max series that I think released yesterday. So I'm very interested to check that out. So I'm recommending myself to do that.
Nice. All right, Joe, take us home.
Since you queued up a Christmas theme one, I will do the same and watch the second best Christmas movie of all time, Batman.
I love it. I love it. I'll ask him more about that in a text thread later. Hey guys, again, if you're on a laptop, consider rating and reviewing the show on Podchaser or Good Pods. Those help the show the most. It helps us gain recommendation and help other search engines, supposedly. If you're on your phone, please consider rating, reviewing, or commenting on Apple Podcasts or Spotify so that those algorithms think that we're important. Trick them. Make them believe we're important. Again, shout out once more to Jonathan Augustin. You're awesome. And remember, if you would like your own shout out, support the show for like $3 a month on either Apple Podcast, Captivate, or Patreon. Last thing you got to remember, though, very important to each of us, is that you know that you are loved, you are cared for, and that we're all a chosen people, a geekdom of priest that's entangled in relationship with one another.